Hey, this is great, Mr. Christianson. Thank you so much. As you know, tonight we're going to talk about principally the International Military Tribunal, which was in 1945-46, dealing with Robert Jackson as the chief American prosecutor. And part of that legacy of that trial is the 12 subsequent trials, of which your father was a participant as a judge in 2 of them.
Well, the first trial was the one with all of the major, well, they're all major war criminals, all 12 of them, and that started in 1945 and wrapped up in October 1946. General Gunn was a recruiter for the War Department, and they wanted to recruit the chief judge of Minnesota, but he said, I've got all these duties, I can't go, but I've got just the guy for you who's out of a job. So he recruited my father. So we went over to Germany in 1947. I started out I was in the 5th grade, and I ended up there finishing the 6th and the 7th grade. So I was 11, 12, and 13.
So what was it like at home in Germany? You were there at Nuremberg, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I went to dependent school, and basically, he talked about what he was doing, and I got to go to all of the trials except one, which was the doctors, where all they did these evil experiments. And he said, it's off limits to you. You can't go listen to the testimony about the German doctors, which most of them at that trial got hung summarily. And there was really no appeal. There was no Supreme Court. And the Allies, basically, once they did the verdict, some people who were in jail tried to appeal and get their sentences done. But that one, he said, that's the only one you can't go to, because I won't let you go to that one.
So how did it work? When did you go to school?
Well, it was just a dependent school over in Firth, which was the next city. And basically, as a kid, I went around in the streetcar, and I could go anywhere I felt like, and and spend some time. And I'd go to these trials on occasion, and when something was going on.
Was it of interest to you as the son of a judge, or did you just, it was
no
hobby?
No, it's historic, and you're there, and you're talking about it, and you're growing up in a country that was Nuremberg, the head of the Nazi regime, basically historically, and we had those things going. And then, of course, you were interested in what was going on in the world because the Cold War had started, so you were always interested in what was going on.
What was the city like at Nuremberg? So because you stayed right within the city limits, was damage? Was there a lot of rubble?
You could sit in downtown Nuremberg, in the old walled city, beautiful, several churches and other buildings, Albert Duer's house, the castle was intact, and the rest of it, if you turned and looked, it was all rubble, just blocks and blocks of rubble. And people hadn't got going on reconstructing anything in Germany, so it was just pretty much annihilated. When you got out of the central city, there were all kinds of areas, residential areas that were intact, but the British finally decided, they came over at night and they plastered the place late in the war, and pretty much there was no industrial things around what they did. They just decided that they were going to end the war, and so they got bombed heavily. I think growing up when you were a kid and the wars going on and after the war, I think everybody knew what was going on. And basically got started, and this was, the first case was Frederick Flick, who was a German industrialist, and supposedly when the war ended, he was one of the richest men in Germany. He had a large interest in Daimler-Benz, Mercedes-Benz. And he and about 4 other people. And that particular trial, my dad was an associate judge. that lasted a while, but Flick did not spend a lot of time in prison because he had slave labor, but he tried to be humane to them. Instead of working them to death, don't feed them, he figured that's not going to help the German war effort. If I don't keep these people well and alive, we can get more production for the Third Reich.
Case number 5 is before the tribunal, the United States of America against Friedrich Flick and others. The marshal will ascertain whether or not all of the defendants named in the indictment are present in court.
On the Flick case, which of course was the case against the steel magnate Frederick Flick, and there were 5 associates, did your dad explain a little bit about what the charges were, that what Flick had done?
Yeah, I mean, he'd used slave labor. Charges the tribunal had were crimes against peace by planning and waging aggressive war against other nations, 2, participating in organizing the formulation and execution of a common plan and conspiracy to commit aforementioned crimes against peace, war crimes, being responsible for murder, ill treatment, and other crimes against prisoners of war and enemy belligerents, crimes against humanities, atrocities, and crimes committed against Germans on the grounds of political, racial, or religious discrimination from 1933 to 1939. So there were crimes against the German people who weren't Jews or they were German citizens, war crimes and crimes against humanity by participating in or being responsible for atrocities and crimes committed against civilians, war crimes and crimes against humanity through plundering and spoliation, which means taking over factories and moving them to Germany, war crimes against humanity through participation in theirs where we're in these cases, enslavement, deportation for slave labor, and ill treatment of civilians in both Germany and occupied countries, as well as prisoners of war. And here's the other famous one, membership in criminal organizations, the SS or the Nazi Party, Deutsche Socialist Arbeiters Party. So this Flick would be lending himself that he didn't cook up the war, but he participated and got gains out of the war. And as I say, what I got out of Flick was a guy my dad said who worked, and the day after that his wife died, and he went to the funeral, and by noon he was at work. And I think it was Flick that, believe it or not, he gave someone is sick, his wife, he gave him at Christmas, he gave him a compassionate leave for 48 hours, not announced to anybody. And he says the MPs were taking bets that he wouldn't come back, but he did. Well, he sat in the audience because out there they had the doc, the judges, the defense attorneys, and the prosecution. They all sat together, and then they had the translators, and that was all the beginning. And then they had a balcony, and then down below you just came in and sat in the audience, and the audience was removed a little bit from the proceedings. And then of course they had a simultaneous translation in French, Russian, German, and English. So you got a set of microphones, and you
a headset like this.
The headset, and dialed it in.
Yeah, I'm listening to you in German. It's very wonderful.
Yeah, sehr gut. Yeah.
The chief judge of that trial, the Flick trial, was a guy named Charles Sears. Do you have any recollection of him at all? He was from Buffalo. He was from where I was from.
Yeah, well, he was a very nice man. He was an older man, very distinguished gentleman. He was the chief judge, yes.
When he gets done with that trial, did he think that's the only trial he would be doing, the Flick trial?
I don't know. He got recruited to do that, where he became the chief judge, and the Ministries case, and that was the longest case of the whole series.
Proceed with the arraignment of the defendants in case number 11, now pending before this tribunal.
Till April of 1949.
That case was really against the ministers who were right below Joachim Ribbentrop. I mean, those were his implementers. Von Weizsäcker, he was really the number one defendant of that case, as far as the named defendant.
Interesting, his son became the first, as I say, president of the German Republic. He was a lawyer, and then about 15 or 20 years ago, he decided maybe he wanted to run for that again. He was unhappy with the German political parties. So that was rather interesting. And von Weizsäcker had, I think, spent some time at the Vatican. And the Pope had been the papal nuncio to Germany. So they had a very close relationship. And I always sometimes wonder why, Hitler said, is Paris burning, and somebody wanted to blow up Rome, but it never happened. And the Pope, I got a copy of a Christmas card from the Pope to von Weizsäcker, and it says, Merry Christmas, and thank you for all you've done for us. And then we have the issue later on of where did all the war criminals disappear to in Argentina and other places, and you probably think some of those people, the Vatican might have had something to do with some of these people getting a free pass out of there. One, Walter Schellenberg, so now we're talking spies and other people. Second in command of the Gestapo, head of the SSD or the Sicherheitsdienst, 6 years imprisonment. And Schellenberg is maybe a person who wasn't absolutely, maybe he was trying to do a few things to sabotage the war effort. I don't know enough about it, but he was a mysterious figure.
Of the 21 defendants arraigned, 2 were acquitted, the others were found guilty on at least 1 count of the indictment and received prison sentences ranging from 3 years, including time served, to 25 years. The chief of counsel for the prosecution was Telford Taylor, and the chief prosecutor was Robert Kempner, who was German-born, German lawyer who became an American and subsequently went back to try his fellow friends. Did your dad ever talk about Kempner at all? He was sort of a unique prosecutor.
No, I had more and more contact and met Telford Taylor. He was more of a guy that I ran into, the prosecutor.
What was he like?
Well, a very distinguished lawyer, wrote some books. He wrote some books on Vietnam and international law, and really a top person who really kept the thing going after Robert Jackson left. He filled in, and he did an excellent job. To sum up what my father felt about this whole thing, you understand there weren't any Nazis in Germany. There were no Nazis. I mean, that's just hard to believe, right? I was not a member of the Nazi Party. Nobody was a member of the Nazi Party. So, okay, here's what he said about how Hitler, tried to stave him off. When people finally decided to oppose Hitler, it was too late. I mean, the opposition, they'd be dead. But the failure, these are talking about leaders in Germany, the failure of these men to remain steadfast to principles of duty and love for their fellow countrymen, many of whom doubtlessly relied on their leadership, illustrates graphically for everyone how unstable and undependable even brilliant and talented men can be when lacking a solid moral foundation and a proper sense of duty.